I thought he'd never leave, but he packed up without a word. Wait, that's not me. That's what I keep imagining happening to her. Me? I'm the one standing in the middle of her bookstore, half sorting returned copies, pretending I know the Dewey Decimal System, when really, I'm just trying not to fidget. She's behind the counter, leaning over a pile of invoices, hair pulled into a loose knot that's somehow elegant and messy at once. I swear, it shouldn't matter, but every time I glance at her, it does. There's this quiet command in the way she moves, like she owns every inch of the place, even if she doesn't. And I don't know why my chest tightens every time our eyes accidentally meet. Earlier, I tried asking her about the new shipment of books. My voice sounded ordinary, but she tilted her head just enough, that subtle smile tugging at the corner of her lips, and suddenly the words felt heavy, like they were hanging in the air for longer than they should. I stumbled over the title of a novel, calling it by the wrong name, and she didn't correct me immediately, just watched, patient, like she was letting me fumble for some invisible reason. I wanted to crawl behind the counter and hide in shame, but I didn't. Instead, I grinned, awkward and nervous, and she gave me a look that made me feel seen but also exposed later. When she handed me a receipt, her fingers brushed mine for just a fraction of a second. Too brief to count as anything, yet long enough for a jolt to run through me. My stomach flipped. I caught myself staring at the spot her fingers had touched, hoping I could somehow memorize the warmth that lingered there. There's a quiet hum in the shop, lamps buzzing softly, the old clock ticking behind the counter, pages rustling as she organizes them. The smell of coffee wafts in from the small cafe corner, bitter but comforting. I keep sneaking glances at her, trying to read her face, but she's unreadable. She's confident, layered, all soft edges and sharp corners at the same time. Every now and then, she pauses mid-task and looks at me, and I feel like I'm an open book she's scanning, judging, understanding. Then there's this pause. Awkward, electric. We both reach for the same paperback on a high shelf. Our hands brush, and I jerk back slightly, embarrassed, but she just laughs softly. Not loud, not performative, just a quiet laugh that fills the space between us like it's its own punctuation. I clear my throat, muttering something stupid about the book, and she tilts her head, eyebrow raised, waiting for me to say more. I can't. The words get stuck in my throat. By the time I leave that evening, the shop is quiet except for her whispering, "See you tomorrow," as I walk toward the door. The words shouldn't mean anything, and maybe they don't, but I can't stop turning them over in my head. I get halfway down the street and realize I can still feel the brush of her fingers, can still hear that soft laugh. And somehow, I know I'll be thinking about it all night, because the thing is, I don't think it's just the book I wanted to hold on to that I didn't mean to stay as long as I did that afternoon. But she needed help reorganizing the back room, and I couldn't think of a reason to say no. The room smelled faintly of dust and old paper, and the fluorescent light overhead buzzed softly. She moved between stacks of boxes with precise, almost delicate movements, while I tried not to knock anything over. She barely spoke, and I noticed how her shoulders tensed every time I reached past her for a box. Her focus was on the task, but her eyes flickered toward me now and then, just a quick glance, not quite meeting mine. I wondered if she felt the same thing I did, a quiet tension, something that wasn't spoken but hung in the air like dust motes catching the light. At one point, she dropped a bundle of receipts and muttered under her breath, bending awkwardly to pick them up. Her back arched a little too stiffly, and I saw the way her hands trembled for just a second. I wanted to reach out, steady her somehow, but I froze, unsure if that would be crossing some invisible line. Instead, I simply handed the papers back, and she took them, fingers brushing mine briefly again. It wasn't much, but it made my chest tighten. She laughed softly at one of my clumsy attempts to stack books, a laugh that didn't carry beyond the walls of the room. It was quiet, almost fragile, and I caught the subtle tension in her eyes. I realized then that she looked tired, lines at the corners of her eyes, a faint slump in her posture. I wanted to ask if she was okay, but the words got stuck in my throat. We worked in silence after that, but I noticed everything. The way her hair fell over one shoulder, the faint scent of her perfume mingling with the paper dust, the quiet determination in her movements despite the exhaustion I could sense. There was a vulnerability there she didn't broadcast, but it was there, and it made the air between us feel heavier. When we finally paused, she leaned against the counter, stretching her arms above her head. I stayed a step back, pretending to adjust a stack of boxes, but I couldn't stop watching her. Her eyes caught mine for a fraction of a second, and then she looked away, biting her lower lip almost imperceptibly. That small hesitation, her quiet, guarded hesitation, felt like an invitation, though I knew better than to act on it. I reached for a book she had placed nearby and handed it to her. Our fingers brushed again, this time lingering slightly longer. She didn't pull away immediately, just exhaled softly, and I could feel a charge in that tiny, silent moment, like static in the air before a storm. She murmured, almost to herself, "Thanks for helping." Her voice was low, almost vulnerable, and it struck me harder than I expected. I wanted to tell her it was nothing, that I didn't mind, but instead I just nodded, caught in the quiet electricity between us. As I left the back room, I realized I was already replaying that pause, that brush of fingers, that tiny tremor in her laugh. Something unspoken had passed between us, something delicate and dangerous, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. The storm hit just as I was leaving the shop, but she called me back before I could step out. "Could you, maybe, help me move the new shipment into the storage room? It's heavy." Her voice had that quiet insistence I couldn't refuse. The rain had started hammering against the windows, a steady, drumming rhythm, and inside the shop, the light was soft, almost too warm for the storm outside. We worked side by side, stacking boxes, our shoulders brushing more than once. Each time it happened, I caught a glimpse of her looking at me, and I swore I saw a flicker of something. Hesitation, curiosity, maybe even a spark. I wanted to say something, anything, but my voice got stuck somewhere between be polite and tell her. She paused, wiping her forehead with the back of her hand, and I noticed the faint tremor in her fingers. "It's heavier than I thought," she murmured, almost like a confession. I wanted to laugh, to tell her she wasn't alone, but I stayed silent, simply lending a steadying hand when she shifted a box. My chest was tight, my mind spinning with thoughts I wasn't ready to say aloud. Then her phone rang, a sharp, intrusive sound that sliced through the quiet. She glanced at the screen, eyes tightening for a brief second before she silenced it. I didn't ask who it was, and she didn't volunteer, but the moment hung between us, unspoken, a reminder that there was a world outside this charged, small space. Another box slipped slightly, and instinctively, I reached for it. Our hands met halfway, fingers brushing again, just enough to send a pulse through me. She held the weight of it a second longer than necessary, eyes darting away when our gazes locked. That pause, the space between us, felt like it stretched forever, and I thought, maybe for the first time, about what it would be like to lean closer, to cross that line. But I didn't. She laughed quietly at her own clumsiness, and I could hear the faint catch in her voice, the vulnerability she didn't show anyone else. My hand lingered near hers, hovering over the box, and I felt the electricity in that near touch, the almost confession that didn't need words. I wanted to tell her that I noticed everything. The tired curve of her shoulders, the soft exhale she let out when no one was watching, but I only let my eyes linger a second longer than normal. A sudden knock at the door startled us both. A friend from her book club stepped in, carrying a tote bag. She smiled, a polite, practiced smile that erased the tension instantly. I stepped back, forcing a casual stance, pretending nothing had shifted. The storm outside had drowned out the quiet storm inside, but I could still feel it, pulsing just beneath the surface. As I left, rain soaking the collar of my jacket, I kept replaying the brush of her fingers, the tremor in her laugh, the near moment where everything felt possible and impossible all at once. I wanted to stop the world, just for a second, to see if she'd reach for me, but I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I walked home with the storm at my back, my mind looping over that near touch, that unspoken admission suspended between us, wondering if she even noticed the way I wanted to lean in. The shop was almost empty when I found her sitting behind the counter, a stack of books half-read and half-shelved. The rain had eased to a drizzle, but the windows were streaked with water, blurring the streetlights outside. I wanted to say something casual, something that would keep the distance safe, but the air between us had changed. She looked up as I approached, eyes catching mine for just a beat longer than usual. "You stayed late again," she said softly, but it wasn't the observation that struck me. It was the way her voice carried a question she wasn't asking out loud. I shrugged, fumbling with the strap of my bag. "I'll like being here." Her lips twitched, half smile, half sigh. "Yeah." She didn't elaborate, but her eyes held something. Frustration, maybe confusion, maybe curiosity. I couldn't tell, and I didn't want to assume. We stood in silence for a moment. The hum of the overhead light and the soft rustle of pages the only sounds. My chest felt tight, like there was too much I wanted to say, too much I couldn't. Finally, she leaned back, resting her hands on the counter. "What are we doing?" she asked. I blinked. Not the words I expected, not the ones I was prepared for. My stomach dropped, and I felt the air thicken around us. I don't know," I admitted, my voice lower than intended, almost swallowed by the space between us. She exhaled slowly, eyes drifting to the rain-streaked window. "We can't keep pretending this is normal," she whispered, almost to herself. Her hands tightened around the edge of the counter, fingers pressing into the wood. I noticed the small tremor, subtle but unmistakable. She wasn't acting, it was all real. "I never meant," I started, but she cut me off with a shake of her head. Not angry, just weary. "No, I know," she said. "It's not about what you meant. It's about everything we're not saying. About how this feels, even when we don't want it to." The words hung in the room like the dust motes caught in the fading light. I wanted to reach for her hand, to close the space between us, but I didn't. I could see the vulnerability in her eyes, the rawness she didn't usually show, and I knew touching her now would be too much, too soon. We just looked at each other, quiet, breathing in unison, letting the weight of unspoken truths press against us. Every fiber of me wanted to bridge the gap, to say the thing I couldn't, but instead, I stayed still, because she needed the space to be seen without interference. Finally, she whispered, almost breaking, "I don't think I've ever been this confused." Her gaze fell to the counter, fingers nervously tracing a scratch in the wood. And in that instant, I understood, whatever this was between us, it wasn't safe, it wasn't simple, and maybe it wasn't supposed to be. She didn't look up when she added, quietly, "And I don't know if I want it to be." I arrived at the shop later than usual, the sky bruised purple from the early evening. She was in the back, leaning against the counter, a small stack of postcards spread out in front of her. I didn't want to interrupt, but something about the way she sat, shoulders curled forward, hands fiddling with the edges of a photograph, pulled me in. "You know," she began, voice low, hesitant. I stopped mid-step, sensing she was on the edge of saying something she hadn't spoken aloud in a long time. "I used to write letters." To him. Her fingers trembled slightly over a worn postcard. "Every day? And he never wrote back." I swallowed. The shop smelled faintly of old paper and coffee, but that scent no longer anchored me. Instead, it tangled with the ache in her voice, the vulnerability I hadn't seen before. "I didn't know," I said softly, not knowing what else to offer. She laughed, a small, bitter sound that didn't reach her eyes. "Not many people do." She picked up a faded photograph, a younger version of herself, smiling with someone whose presence felt heavier than the paper it rested on. "I lost him," she said simply, almost to herself. "And I don't think I ever fully forgave myself." Her honesty hit me harder than I expected. I wanted to say something reassuring, to offer the comfort I didn't know she wanted, but my words felt insufficient, clumsy. Instead, I just knelt beside the counter, letting her own voice fill the space. "You remind me of him," she said suddenly, eyes flicking to mine. Not accusing, not comparing, just stating it like a fact she couldn't avoid. I froze, because I didn't know what to feel. Relief? Fear? Desire? something raw and messy that made my stomach twist. She exhaled, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. It's not fair to you, I know. I see it in your eyes, the way you care. She trailed off, and for a moment, neither of us spoke, just the quiet hum of the shop around us. I wanted to reach out, to take her hand, to say that she wasn't alone, but I stopped. I knew that if I touched her now, I might erase the delicate balance between confession and restraint, and I wasn't ready to risk it. So I just sat there, silently, letting her vulnerability settle between us. She placed the photograph back on the counter, fingers lingering on the edges for a heartbeat too long. I haven't shown anyone this, she whispered. Her voice cracked just slightly. Not even me sometimes. And then she looked up at me, eyes wide and unguarded, and I felt something shift. A quiet, seismic tremor beneath the surface of everything we'd been tiptoeing around. My chest tightened. I wanted to tell her it was okay, that she didn't have to carry it alone, but all I could do was nod. She smiled faintly, a soft, trembling thing. And in that smile, I saw both her strength and her fragility, and the space between us felt charged in a way that neither words nor touches could fully explain. For a long moment, we just stayed like that, two people caught on the edge of something enormous, neither of us moving, neither of us speaking, and I realized I'd been holding my breath without even knowing it. And then she whispered, almost to herself, I don't think I can be that careful anymore. The shop was quiet that evening, the storm from earlier reduced to a drizzle tapping softly on the windows. I found her in the back room, sorting through a box of returned novels, but she didn't look up when I came in. I didn't speak immediately, just stood in the doorway, letting the silence stretch. Finally, she exhaled, shoulders sagging just slightly, as if carrying the weight of everything she hadn't said. I don't know why I let you stick around, she murmured, voice low, almost teasing but edged with something raw. You shouldn't care as much as you do. I knelt beside her, helping her lift a heavy box, fingers brushing hers. Not deliberately, not dramatically, just a touch, natural and unforced. She didn't pull away, and I didn't move mine. The simplicity of it felt monumental, like an admission neither of us had to speak. I care, I said finally, almost a whisper. It wasn't a confession or a demand. It wasn't meant to change anything. It just was. Her eyes met mine, quiet, searching, and for the first time, I saw her let herself relax. No walls, no performative strength, just her. Maybe I'm tired of pretending, she said. A small, vulnerable laugh escaped, and I mirrored it softly, because it was the only honest response. We moved together through the quiet of the back room, stacking books in tandem, a rhythm that didn't require words. Every glance, every brush of hands carried the weight of what had been building between us for weeks, months, even, without needing to say it aloud. At one point, a small paperback slipped from the top of a stack. I caught it, and our hands met again, fingers intertwining almost instinctively. She didn't pull back. She didn't smile. She just stayed there, breathing in sync with me, and somehow, that was everything. We sat down on the floor amid stacks of books, backs leaning against the shelves. No words, just shared space, just the quiet acknowledgement of what had been unspoken. I traced a line along the edge of her hand with my thumb, gentle, careful, and she let it happen. It was intimate, but not possessive. Safe, but charged. The hum of the shop, the faint scent of coffee and old paper, the soft drizzle outside, all of it wrapped around us, cocooning us in a moment neither of us had to define. We didn't need declarations, didn't need promises. Everything we had been circling, every pause, every near touch, every hesitant glance, it was all here, unspoken but understood. She leaned slightly against me, not pressing, not seeking, just allowing herself to rest. I stayed still, my forehead brushing hers, feeling the small tremor in her shoulder that told me she trusted me, in this quiet, imperceptible way. Minutes passed, or hours. Time didn't matter. We were just two people, finally existing in the same space without pretending, without fear. And when she whispered softly, almost to herself, I guess this feels right. It wasn't dramatic or sweeping, but it was enough. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I just stayed there, letting the silence speak for us both. I still remember that night, sitting there among stacks of books, the rain having finally stopped, and realizing how much had shifted in such a quiet way. It wasn't fireworks or dramatic confessions, just the subtle turning of something inside both of us, a recognition that what had been simmering for months didn't need words to exist anymore. I notice it in the way she smiles now, softer, less guarded, a small lift of her eyes that invites me in rather than keeping me at a careful distance. And I notice it in myself, too, how I can sit beside her without rehearsing my words, without pretending, just being present in the space we share. There's a calmness to it, an honesty that feels earned rather than stumbled into. Love, I've learned, doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it's the pauses, the hand brushes, the quiet understanding that doesn't need a declaration. Sometimes it's surviving the awkward glances, the near misses, the small tremors of vulnerability, and still choosing to stay. I can't say we've figured everything out, or that we ever will, but we've chosen each other in these small, imperceptible ways that mean more than any sweeping words ever could. I catch myself thinking of her in the small details now, the way her fingers hover over a book's spine, the faint crease in her forehead when she's focused, the quiet laugh that sneaks out when she's truly amused. And I see her noticing me, too, in ways subtle enough to feel private, yet powerful enough to remind me that this is real, tangible, ours. It hasn't been perfect, and it won't be. But there's something grounding in knowing that our connection was never about perfect timing or flawless circumstances. It was about the willingness to sit in silence, to observe, to hesitate, to stumble, and to finally understand that sometimes love grows in the quietest of moments. And sometimes, the most enduring gestures aren't shouted. They're whispered in a brush of fingers, a shared look, a small pause that says, without words, I see you. I'll stay. I glance around the shop now, the light warm on the shelves, the hum of life in the background, and I feel that same quiet certainty again. We don't need grand declarations. We don't need perfect timing. We just need this understanding, this presence, this subtle, earned connection that neither of us can unsee. And as I lean back in the chair, her hand brushing mine once more, I can't help but smile. Because it's enough. It's real. It's ours. If this story made you feel something, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?